Hi there, this is Smart Penguins, and we're here to help you with your game making adventures. Join us as we will be creating a game from start to finish. If you're looking to learn or improve in Buildbox game development, you are in the right place. In this video, we'll start creating our inventory system. This is the end result of this video, and we'll show how you can make this in Buildbox. If you haven't installed Buildbox yet, there is a link in the description below of a video how you can do that. Launch Buildbox, we'll go straight to Create New, Create Empty. A default window that we see when the new game launches is what's called a mind map. Today we'll just be working in UI screen. To add UI screen, we can go into our node panel, find the UI screen, click and drag into our scene. For UI screen to be loaded, we'll need to connect it to UI from our 2D world. To get more information about all the windows and all the options we have here, you can go to Help and click on Buildbox Documentations. So if you're looking for information about mind map, you can click on mind map, and here you have all the information. Before we go inside our UI screen and start working on our inventory, let's go to Settings, which is this button right here in the corner, and switch our orientation to landscape. Click OK. To go inside UI screen, you can either click the edit icon in the corner right here, or you can double click on UI screen. Now we're inside UI screen. To get info about UI screen, you can also go to Buildbox and go to UI node workspace. And here we have a navigation bar, we have an asset panel, then we have our outliner, UI editor, our option panel, and UI animation editor right here. We'll start by adding a background image for our inventory screen. Let's go to our asset folder and find the file that we want to use for our background. Click, and we have two options, navigation button and image. We want to import it as an image, and now we can stretch it by going to corner of the image and clicking and dragging it. When we have the image selected, on the right side we have our option menu. We can see the name of our image. Let's rename it to BG. And we have the position. We can change the values if we want, X and Y, rotation, scale, and opacity. Then we have an image attribute. We can go inside our image attribute, and we have some options that we can use to change the color of our image. Let's change our color for this image a little bit. Click Save, and now we'll modify the color for our image. Let's go to our outliner, which is right here, and let's use the lock to lock our background image so we wouldn't accidentally select it or delete it when we're working in our UI editor. Now we will add a inventory panel. Let's go to our asset panel, and at the top where it says asset library, let's click plus, and we'll use a default UI asset. Let's click on it, and let's rename it to inventory. And let's go to our asset folder, and we'll use the inventory bottom. Okay, now we can drag it inside our scene. We'll position it at 560/80. Next, let's add our inventory item. We'll go to asset library, add another default, select it. Let's rename it to inventory item. Go to our asset folder, and we'll use the panel beige for it. Let's drag it in our scene, and we'll position it at 920/80. Now we'll create 6 more copies, and we'll place them 120 points apart. You can use WASD keys to duplicate them. Since we want to duplicate them to the left, we'll use the A key. Click A, click A again, and our last one. Now we have our inventory panel, and we have our inventory item slots. Let's save our project. Now we'll add ability for our slot to have an item. To do that, we'll go inside our asset nodes. Double click on the inventory item. We're inside our asset nodes. Let's go to Buildbox Documentation. Let's click on asset nodes, and then let's go into node map workspace. And we can see that we have a navigation bar, our node panel, our node map, our JavaScript editor, and our option panel. Our inventory item has two nodes. It has a start node and it has an animation node. The animation node is the one that has the image of our item. To add an object to our image, we can duplicate a node by pressing D. And now we have two animation nodes. Now let's go to our asset folder and select Apple, and we'll drag into our animation window. Drop it. When you have two or more animations in your asset, you need to make sure that the depth order is set properly. Currently we have depth order of 0 in our option panel on both. Since we want our apple to display on top of our card, let's set our depth order of apple to 1. Now let's click play. And now we can see that all of our slots have an apple now. Let's rename our animations. Let's add a different item to our slot. To do that, let's duplicate apple. Select it. Let's drag carrot inside our animation. Let's rename it to carrot. If we click and play now, then we can see that we have apple and carrot displayed in the same item slot, and our carrot is too big. And let's scale down our carrot by going to scale and setting it to 0.5, and let's rotate z-axis by 45. Let's go see what we have now. And now our carrot fits into our slot, but we still have two items displayed in one slot. What we need to do is be able to change which animation gets displayed. To do that, let's go to our node panel, click Advanced, and there's a node called the State Machine. Let's click and drag our state machine into our node map, and let's add two states. 1, 2. Now we have two states. Let's go to Buildbox documentation to find more information about nodes. Let's go to Asset Nodes. So our node is made of a node name, an edit icon, a node type, and then we have our input, which is on the left side, and our output, which are on the right side. And then we have connectors that are connecting inputs and outputs of different nodes. What State Machine does, it allows only one output to be active at one time. So if we connect our carrot and apple to different states, and then on create, we will trigger state apple. If we play now, we see only apple here. If we change on create state to be 2, now we can see carrots. And we can add another state, an empty state. If on create, we'll connect it to empty state. We play, there's nothing in our item. Now let's introduce a random node. Let's go to our node panel, and under actions, we can find our random node. Drag and drop it into our node map. What a random node does, it generates a random number between 0 and 1. In the options panel, we have the ability to select our threshold, which is currently at 0.5. So we have 50% chance it's going to be over and 50% chance it's going to be under. Let's connect on create into our in, and let's connect over to our apple and under to our carrot. Press play now, and we can see that each time we reload the game, we have random items in our slots. Later on in the series, we'll replace this random function with different logic. In case you want to check what type of output we get from all the nodes, we can go to our node panel, and under events, we have a logger. We can connect a logger to any output, and it will log the output of that node into our log. Let's see what output we get for our created. So press play, and now we can see that we have true, 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 true. Since we have 7 slots, we have 7 true values that we logged. Let's delete our logger. Now let's add a label that will display our count of those items to our slots. Let's go on our node panel and find label. Let's add, and let's connect enabled to create it. Let's put in some text, 5 for instance, and play. And now you can see that our label is displayed. It's underneath our item. So to change that, we can go to position and set z-axis of our label to 1, and we can play. Now it's on top. Now let's position our label to top right corner. Let's scale it down to 0.5 so the label will be smaller. And let's position it to 0.6 and 0.6. Press play. And now we can see the number in the top right corner. Let's try a bigger number. Let's try a 3-digit number. 1, 2, 3. Press play. And you can see that our number is getting out of our slot. To fix that, we can go and change our alignment to align right. Press play. And now the number doesn't get out of the slot, but we have a bigger gap. Let's adjust our X for that gap. Set it to 0.8. Press play. That's more like it. And let's try again with a smaller number. Now we have a label that's working. Now let's change our font to stand out better on the slot. Let's go to our font editor, which is in the top right corner. Click on it. Now we get a font builder. Let's go to Buildbox documentation and look at font builder. And in here we can see that we have our templates, then we have our font preview window, and then our option panel. In our options panel, let's change our main color to iron. Click OK. Let's add a stroke to our font and we'll disable the gradient. And let's add a shadow. Close our font builder, and now you can see that we modified our label font. Now let's add a touch visual effect to our slot. For that, let's duplicate our slot by clicking W, leave one as slot, and the other one, let's call it touched. Let's change the color of our slot touched. We'll use a steel color and we'll make it 50% transparent. We'll need to add a state machine to switch between the animations. Let's go to our node panel, and this time we'll use the search to find it. Let's start typing it. There's our state machine. Let's add 2 states. Let's remove the connections. And now let's connect state 1 to slot and state 2 to slot touched. And let's connect created to state 2 to see how slot touched looks. So let's add the ability to detect touch and switch state. For that, let's go to controls and add a isTouched node. Let's switch on created, start with a state 1, and on isTouched, let's switch to state 2. Press play. And now you can see if we click on one, it changes the state and stays there. Now let's add ability. If you release the button, it will change back the state. isTouched node outputs true when the object is touched and returns false when the object is not touched. And to switch state, we need the input to be true. So we need a way to convert false to true so that when we get false from isTouched, we switch the state. Let's go on our node panel, and under actions, we have a signal invert. Let's add that to our map, and let's connect in from a touched and out to our state 1. So let's play. And now you can see if we touch it and release it, it switches back. Now let's work on getting the number to decrease each time we click on a slot. For that, we'll need to be able to modify our label. And Buildbox does not have a node yet for that. We'll have to create our own script. Let's go under Advanced and let's drag in a script node. And if we click Edit button, we get a script editor. To get documentations about scripting, let's go to Help and click JavaScript API reference. You can use this page to look up all the functions that are made available by Buildbox. A new script node starts with 4 functions. Init is the first function that will run when the asset gets loaded. After that, the start function is going to run. Update functions runs every frame. And signal function runs when one of our inputs in our node receives a new signal. For this node, we'll just use the signal function. In our script node, let's add an input and let's call it value. And in our options panel, let's click add attribute and let's add a text attribute. And we'll call it label name. We'll set the label name to the name of the label that we're trying to edit. And the label name that we use for count is label. Let's rename our node. We'll call it value to label. Now we need to get reference to our label object in our signal script. Each object in the game, Buildbox calls an entity in script. If we go to the documentations, under script node, we can find the function entity, which returns an entity object of this script node. And if we click on a function, Buildbox gives us an example how to use it. In this example, we use let_ent to create a new variable called ent and set that entity to the variable. And then we can use ent variable to run functions that are available in entity. So let's copy this script and let's add it to our function. Now we have access to entity. Now let's go to our entity, and inside our entity documentations, we have a function component which searches components with a specific name in the current entity and returns if it's found. Otherwise, returns null. Let's click on component name, and there's an example of how to find a component. And in this example, we have let collide equals this entity component, and we look for if collide name. After that, uses a if statement passing the variable in that checks if the collide is not null. If it's not null, then we can continue our operations. Let's copy this code and let's paste it in, fix the format. This entity will replace with ent that we created on the previous line. And since we're looking for a label, let's change our variable name to label. Let's change it in if statement too. And we can remove this line. Let's switch if collide to label. That's the name of our label that we have. And now let's change the text of our label. Let's go back to our documentation. Let's go to UI, label. And now we can see that there is a set text function that we can use to set the value. So if our label is not null, let's do label dot set text, and let's pass in a string of hi. And now let's connect isTouch_node to value to label. Press play. If we touch one of them, we can see all of the slots change to hi. The reason behind that is how isTouch works. So if you touch one, it says true for the one you touch, but all the other ones receive false. To fix that, we can go to action and add a signal filter and put the signal through signal filter. We'll set pass only to true and out to value. Press play, and now we can see each one we touch switches to high. Now let's go back to our script and switch to use the value input instead of the text that we wrote in. So inside here, what we want to do is say string and use the value that we get from the signal and input in here. The reason for using string is so that any input type can be converted to a string. Press play, and now each one we click, instead of displaying high, it says true, which is the input that we get from the isTouch. If we bypass the filter, run it like that, now we can see isTouch value of every slot. Last thing that we'll add to this node is the ability to receive the label name from our attribute. To do that, let's go check script when we have this function attribute available for us. And how we call the value of the attribute is this attribute and pass in the attribute name. Let's copy this code and let's put it in at line 2. Rename the variable to label name. And let's copy our attribute name. And now we can use this label name when we're getting the component. Let's replace our label string with our new label name variable. Now we're done with this node. Let's test it, and we can see that it still functions correctly. And if we go change our label to count and run it now, it's not working anymore. Now let's go into our value label and change it to count here. And now it's connected again. Now that we have a node that can change value of a label, next thing, we need to store and load variables. If we go under advanced, we can find that we have variable save node and variable load node. But there's no variable init node. To create a variable init node, let's duplicate variable load node and modify it. Let's rename it to variable init, and let's add an input init. Now let's add an attribute, number, and call it init value. Let's set it to 10. Now let's go into signal function, and in our if statement, let's add another if statement. And we'll check if the variable that we're trying to get, storage variable name, is undefined. If it's undefined, let's set it to init value. And let's copy this attribute code right there. And we'll use the init value attribute. And that's all we had to do to create a variable init. Now let's connect our signal filter output to init and connect our value to label. Press play. And now each one we clicked initializes to 10. We want to initialize the variable on create, so we'll connect created to variable initialize. Also, let's rename our variable name to count. And storage, let's switch to this entity instead of global, so that every entity would have their own count. So let's play. And now we can see that every item starts with 10. Next thing what we're going to do is on click, we want to decrease our count by 1. To do that, we'll need to create another script called add. In this script, let's add in and out. What we want this script to do is our loaded variable value to be passed in, and in the script we'll add amount to it and pass it out and save it. And at the same time, we want to change the value of the label. Let's change our variable name to match the variable init name, storage this entity, and same for load. And let's connect the signal filtered output to get variable. In add script, let's add an attribute, number, and we'll call it amount. Since it's an add function and we want to decrease the amount, let's set the amount to -1. And we can delete all our function except the signal. Now let's create a variable amount and let's get the value from the attribute. Let's create a variable for our output value. For our output value, we'll get our input value and add our amount. Now what's left is us to send value into our out. Let's go to documentations. And in the script, we have a function called emit signal. And how you use emit signal is use this emit signal. You pass in the name of the output and the value that you want to pass. Let's copy this code. And the name of our output is out. And the value that we're trying to pass is out value. And we misspelled attribute. Let's fix that. Press play. And now if we click, the value of each slot decreases. We'll stop here for part 1. If you want more specific details about any part of this video, write in the comments below and subscribe to our channel to receive notification of the next parts of this series. Thank you for watching and have fun with your game making adventures.